Jen and Cam are two funny ladies who like to talk about murder, mass murder, murder-suicide, serial killers, spree killers, thrill killers, contract killings, honor killings, and a whole lot of other shit too heinous for me to list here. If you're disturbed by this sort of content, you may want to listen to something else. And if you're a child trying to listen to our true crime podcast, well, you better ask your mama.
Hi, Jen.
Hey, Kim, how are you?
I'm really pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm at home. Kids are starting summer school tomorrow, so.
Oh, nice.
Well, actually, Wednesday, yeah.
Oh.
So that's nice.
It is
Quiet.
nice.
Good for me. Not so great for them, but whatever. And it's not even fun summer school. It's to try to get some extra credit, you know. But anyway, I've got a case, and I'm telling you, this is one of those ones that you always kind of think about in the back of your mind ever since, or at least I thought about this case in the back of my mind ever since I saw it on Unsolved Mysteries.
Ooh. Yes. Yes, please. Well, I can't wait. Let's hear it.
As a parent of young adults, one of the hardest things to do is to send them off into the real world, right? Mm-hmm. We give them all the knowledge and experience that we have to try to keep them safe and just to make them survive out in the world. But sometimes the fate of our children comes down just to being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
It's awful.
This was the case with Lisa Marie Kimmell. Born on July 18th, 1969 in Covington, Tennessee, to Sheila and Ronald Kimmell, Lisa was the eldest of 4 children, 2 girls and a boy. Unfortunately, the boy was killed in a very tragic accident when he was 3 years old.
Ooh.
Heartbreaking. Lisa Marie would prove to be a force to be reckoned with. Like a lot of girls, she loved teddy bears and cats and playing the piano, but she was also fiercely determined, mature beyond her years, and a straight arrow. Her grandma said she was like a 30-year-old trapped in a teenager's body.
I know one of those.
Mm-hmm. Her mother, Sheila, was the regional manager of the Arby's fast food franchise, and even though she lived in Montana, she worked in Denver, Colorado. Sheila would stay in an apartment in Colorado during the week and then drive home or fly on Friday evenings to her family in Montana. The company that Sheila worked for, they owned 5 Arby's franchises. They rented a couple of apartments out for people that were in management training. And so they would go there, they'd stay at the apartment. Once their training was done, they'd go on. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Understand what's going on? All right. Lisa Marie wanted to try restaurant management as well. Her parents said she had a business plan and a credit rating by the time she was 17. At 14, she asked her parents to co-sign a loan for her for a waterbed. Seriously. And she paid it off herself.
Good.
Just
smart kid. Yep.
A bright young woman. Even though her parents wanted her to go to college, Lisa wanted to get straight to work. Her parents said that there was no talking her out of it, and she was incredibly strong-willed and had it all planned out. After high school, Lisa moved into her own apartment and became assistant manager in an Arby's restaurant in Billings, Montana. Now, actually, Lisa had started working at Arby's when she was 14. She started out as a cashier and worked her way up into management. In December of 1989, Lisa would be given a manager's job at the Arby's in Aurora, Colorado. And just like her mother, she would go back and forth between Colorado and Montana. She would stay at Colorado with her mother during the week and then Montana on the weekends. Lisa would make that 8-hour commute in her brand new 1988 black Honda SRX SI 2-seater sports car, a car that she purchased all on her own. Got the loan by herself, everything. This is an 18-year-old girl. My goodness. It floors me that she had it together. Because I still don't have it together and I'm 52. But anyway, she even got vanity plates to put on it that says Lil Miss. And that was the nickname her grandmother had given her, shortened from Little Miss Lisa Marie. Easter weekend of 1988 was on the horizon, and Lisa Marie wanted to drive home to Billings to get more of her belongings to take back to Colorado. She was going to move there permanently, because she thought she'd have a better chance of moving further up in the company. Well, along the way home, she was going to stop to visit a friend who was about to have surgery for cancer. And she also wanted to stop in Cody, Wyoming to pick up a new boyfriend because Lisa wanted to introduce him to her family. And she was very nervous about that. Lisa's mother, Sheila, was going on a quick ski trip with the family before heading home for Easter Sunday. Sheila offered to stay back a day and to make the drive home with Lisa, right? Lisa's like, I'm kind of worried about you on the drive home. It's a long drive. And Lisa's like, Mom, it's only a 2-seater car. I'm picking up my boyfriend. There's no room. I'm going to make these stops. You're going to want to get black, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, Lisa convinced her mother that she was going to be fine. Even though the parents were worried about letting the 18-year-old make that 600-mile trip home by herself, she had done the drive many times before. Only this time, the new thing was she was going to be heading to, or adding Cody, Wyoming to the route. So they sat down with her and they mapped everything out just so she would have the best route home and everything was fine. And probably because Lisa was so incredibly mature, they let her do all this. Mm-hmm. Not that they could not let her do this because she was 18 and she had been living on her own since high school. She graduated,
Yeah, they trusted her.
There's only so much she can do, but they didn't put a stop to it. Exactly. Right. So after work on Friday, March 25th, 1988, Lisa got in her Honda and headed north. She would take Interstate 25 to Casper, Wyoming, and from there she would take the mostly 2-lane US 2026 to Greybull, where she would then finish the trip to her boyfriend's house in Cody, Wyoming. She planned to stay the night there and then make the remaining hour-and-a-half trek to Billings the next morning with her boyfriend in tow. At 8:39 p.m., Lisa was right on schedule. However, the first hiccup of her trip would occur in Douglas, Wyoming, near Orange Junction. Lisa was clocked doing 88 miles per hour by Alan Lesko of the Wyoming Highway Patrol. I just have to add this because all of us kids in the 80s, we can't drive 55.
Nope, we
Sorry.
cannot. I like that. I see what you did there.
My little salute, tribute to Sammy Hagar. Anyway, the officers described Lisa as being very soft-spoken and, quote, the type of girl that anybody would want for a daughter. He turned his voice recorder on when speaking to her, and it was the last recording of Lisa. Now, back then, Wyoming required all out-of-state drivers to pay their speeding tickets at the time of issue because out-of-state drivers were notorious to making it to their destination and then never paying the ticket, especially if they weren't ever going to pass through the state again. Officer Lesko followed Lisa to an ATM machine to give $120 to pay her fine because she only had $40 cash on her. Now, if you're listening, not in the United States, and you come to the United States and you get a ticket, do not ever pay your police officer because they will consider that a bribe. This happened back in the 80s.
So it was
we don't do
then?
That now. It was a different time. We do not do that now.
Okay.
You'll be thrown in jail if you offer money to a police officer. Don't do it. Well, if you get the right police officer, you might not.
Exactly.
But it is bad advice to pay a police officer. But anyway, the officer follows Lisa to an ATM machine, but the ATM machine was not compatible with her credit card. So Officer Lesko could have arrested Lisa, but he said, looking at her, he just knew that she wasn't the type to shirk responsibilities, so he let her go. Lisa promised to pay the ticket with a check in the mail when she got home. Before getting back in her vehicle, she asked Officer Lesko how to get back out of town. Now, aside from Lisa Marie's killer, Patrolman Lesko is the last known person to see Lisa alive. She never made it to Cody, Wyoming to pick up her boyfriend. It's thought that Lisa most likely ran into the man that would kill her near a rest area in Waltman on US 2026. When Lisa Marie didn't arrive at her boyfriend's house in Cody as planned, he was immediately worried and called her parents. The Kimmells were told that the police could not take a missing persons report until the person had been missing for 72 hours. Being an 18-year-old female alone in the middle of nowhere, and even though she clearly had a specific itinerary, none of it seemed to pursue the police to change their policy. Now, they were able to put out different kinds of warnings, but no missing person could have been issued. They did have people looking, but they had problems with the police. I know you all are shocked when you hear this because it's searching for a missing kid, but we'll get to that later. The Kimmells found themselves all on their own, and while Sheila stayed at home with the younger daughters making phone calls to every hospital in Wyoming, Lisa's father, Ron, went searching. He was a former Marine and a man on a mission. Ron, with the help of Lisa's boyfriend, chartered a plane on March of 26 from Spirit Mountain Aviation in Cody, Wyoming. It seems her boyfriend knew a lot of pilots, and he was able to help them charter planes. So they flew over the areas where Lisa would have traveled. And even if they weren't likely to find Lisa specifically, they thought they'd be able to spot, if her car had broke down on the road or went off into the ditch. At the time, the theory that most people had was that Lisa had been in a bad accident and she wasn't able to call home. Remember, no cell phones.
Yep.
So while the boy went on the plane, the boyfriend, I should add, he was a man. While the boyfriend went on the plane, Ron took to the road. And even though the Kimmells had carefully planned out the route that Lisa would take, there were 3 different possible ways that she could have traveled to Cody, Wyoming. So her father drove all those different routes looking for a sign of her car, or a sign of her, actually. Sheila Kimmell immediately alerted the news outlets of Lisa's disappearance, and even Lisa's aunt and uncle chartered a plane on Thursday, March 31st to help with the search. But nothing was found. Lisa never showed up, neither did her car. And even after the 72-hour wait period, the police still wouldn't take the missing persons report because nobody knew where Lisa had actually gone missing. So nobody knew which police department it would take to report, who had jurisdiction of where and what. It was a mess.
That has to be frustrating beyond
so
belief.
frustrating.
You just have to sit there and wait.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So the Kimmells were still on their own. And they called every news outlet that they knew. They did. These people searched high and low, so much money. And not that that was a matter, but these people were so kind. Like the pilots donated their time and they just had to pay for the fuel charges. I mean, people were so generous. They came together in their time of need, and it's amazing. It's really heartwarming to hear that. Ron Kimmell called every sheriff's office along the routes his daughter could have taken to make them aware of her disappearance and to see if they had any Jane Does. He also continued to canvass hotels and convenient marts. He distributed flyers to anybody who would take them. He focused on truckers driving the highways. If Lisa had not been in an accident, then she could literally be anywhere. It also meant that foul play was also on the table. So in the book, The Murder of Little Miss, written by Lisa's mother, Sheila, which I'm telling you, she says that 6 days after Lisa had gone missing, she woke up in the middle of the night because she heard Lisa call out to her. She quickly sat up and she saw Lisa at the foot of her bed.
Oh, girl.
And then Lisa faded away. And Sheila said that she knew at that minute that they would never find Lisa alive. Sorry, overclumped this book. I'm telling you, I read it and by page 40, I had cried 5 times.
That's awful.
Sheila, Lisa's mom, also talks about a psychic that she and Ron met with on Saturday, April 2nd. They were skeptical, but to this point, they were ready to do anything. They just needed answers. The man held one of Lisa's teddy bears to him, and then with tears in his eyes, he said that Lisa was in the river. He paused and then said, quote, "I think you already know she's not alive." And when they asked if he knew where she was, he said he wasn't really sure, but he pointed to a map of the North Platte River near a town of Casper. And it was nowhere close to the route that Lisa was supposed to take.
Did she take a shortcut or something, or did she just end up somewhere?
We
don't know yet. Okay.
That same day, Saturday, April 2nd, 2 fishermen were spending the day on the North Platte River when one of them spotted a body. At first, he wasn't sure what he was seeing, but then he remembered the news of there had been reports of a missing girl from Montana, and he realized that it was probably her. Authorities arrived, and it was soon confirmed that the mostly nude body found in the frigid waters of the North Platte River was indeed Lisa Marie Kimmell. Eventually, the autopsy would reveal that she had been sexually assaulted multiple times and most likely held captive for some time since there were marks on her wrists and ankles. There were no drugs or alcohol in her body, and stomach contents showed that she had eaten a beef stew shortly before she died. She sustained blunt force trauma to the head, a blow rendered with such force that it left a 4-inch crack in her skull. She would have been unconscious when he stabbed her 6 times. However, judging by the small cuts near the stab wounds, it appeared as though the killer felt around with a knife to avoid hitting her ribs. In other words, he very precisely slid the knife into the most important places to pierce organs. Places that he knew that it would kill her the fastest.
Sounds like a hunter.
Exactly. 3 of the wounds went all the way to her spine. The coroner said that the stabs would have caused massive internal bleeding and that she had lost so much blood that there was very little left in her body during the autopsy. Lisa's body was then tossed off the old government bridge into the North Platte River. When Lisa's body was found, rigor mortis was still present, meaning that she had been killed at least 36 to 48 hours earlier. And Sheila says she knew in her heart that Lisa had died on that Thursday because that's when Lisa appeared at the foot of her bed. Like one last call out to her mother. Now, whether you believe it or not, doesn't matter. Sheila believes it. And if that's healing to her,
exactly.
I believe it too. Blood matching Lisa had been found on the side of the bridge, and since the structure was off the normal beaten path, the Natrona County Sheriff's Department believed that the perpetrator was probably a local. However, there was still no trace of Lisa's car. Believing that the killer could still have her car, Sheriff Ketchum put out an APB on the black Honda. Tons of eyewitness accounts poured in. The Natrona County Sheriff's Office had trouble keeping up with the tips and with the sheer area that needed to be canvassed. The Kimmells wanted help from other law enforcement, but Sheriff Ketchum vehemently declined the help. Let me just say this little story. This is another part that made me cry. Sheila talks about hearing this devastated news on the Saturday evening that was like the Saturday before Easter, right? The next day was Easter. And so they went to bed with the news knowing that their daughter was dead, or knowing that their daughter had passed, I'm sorry. And then the next morning, the entire town knew. And it was Easter morning. They woke up to the news that Lisa's body had been found. Well, she said that she'd been up all night crying and she was asleep and she heard a knock on the door. She answers the door and there were 2 little boys under the age of 10. She'd never seen them before, never met them before. And they were standing on their porch with a handmade Easter basket. And the basket was filled with candy. And the boys explained that they knew how sad the family must be. And they knew that there were younger kids at home, which Lisa had sisters 13 and 16 at the time. And they wanted to share their candy with them because they had plenty. Aww. Isn't that the sweetest thing?
Yes.
That made me tear. I cried. I'm not going to lie. I cried. All right. Sorry. Back to the regular programming. Let's see. The problem with eyewitness accounts was that most of them were from reliable, credible sources, but most likely couldn't have occurred. One witness was the wife of a local sheriff. Lisa's car was very distinct, so was the license plate. Many people reported seeing a blonde woman driving a car matching the car's description as late as the day before she died. And considering she was being held captive, we know that this couldn't possibly be true. But, the killer could have loaned the car out to somebody who just happened to be blonde. We don't know. So did witnesses see a car just like Lisa or saw a blonde girl and then their minds just filled in the part about the license plate? You know how our minds deceive us all the time.
Yes.
But calls came in from as far away as Canada. One was even on the day after she supposedly had died. We'll never know, but we do know that a lot of the calls that did came in were also not followed up on. But that's a different case. Or that's a different story. That's headed in a different way. Yeah. Let's put it that way. So there were no real suspects in the case. The FBI felt strongly that she'd been a victim of a serial killer. His organizational skills were excellent. He'd managed to snatch a whole person and a whole car and not leave a single trace of his work. And there was no way that this could have been his first murder. The police managed to recover DNA of Lisa's rapists, even though she had been thrown in the river. That DNA would eventually be the saving grace of this case. However, at the time, of course, science wasn't at that level where they could match the killer's semen to anyone. But they could use it. But they could use it to eliminate people. So they eliminated her boyfriend and even Officer Lesko, who had been the one that gave her the speeding ticket. But for a brief time, Sheriff Ron Ketchum was actually considered a suspect, and mostly due because his own inexplicable behavior. Ketchum was a political figure in Casper, Wyoming, and had served as a county sheriff from 87 to 1991. After leaving the sheriff's office, he taught criminal justice at the University of Wyoming and worked as a polygraph examiner. And in 1999, he was elected to the Natrona County Board of Commissioners. And the next year, he was named chairman. It seemed rather odd to many that he did not want any outside help in the Lisa Kimmell case, and even going as far as to tell the Kimmells that they needed to stop pressuring him to accept help. And that, quote, "You are not the victims, Lisa was." He even threatened to throw them in jail.
No. What?
He was... After a credible report came in that Ketchum's patrol car had been seen parked behind a small black sports car with a young woman driver on the side of the road the night of March 25th, federal investigator Flickinger decided Ketchum needed to be eliminated as a suspect. Behind the scenes, other law enforcement people had mentioned that Ketchum had a reputation for stopping young, attractive women, and that, yes, it would be good to eliminate him as being a suspect in this investigation. But you know what? Ketchum refused to give a blood sample.
Why? If he didn't do it, why?
Nobody's sure why. No, but he refused.
That tells me he may have been wanted on something else.
Uh-huh. But 4.5 months later, when he finally did the test, that found out he wasn't a match. Mm-hmm. And maybe he was just insulted by the whole thing, but as law enforcement, he had to know that he had to be eliminated from the investigation. But in addition to his stubborn opposition to give a blood sample, on the 2-year anniversary of Lisa Marie's death, this would be in 1990, he tried to kill himself. So it made the people, especially the Kimmells, really worried that he was involved in Lisa's death some way. Seriously, I mean, he did end up giving the sample. But, at one point, he said he would give a sample, and he had two other, a sheriff and a lieutenant, was there with them to take the blood samples. It was just the three of them. Mm-hmm. For some reason, Ketchum talked the two other officers to take blood too, to give samples. Even they didn't need to take samples, but he talked them into giving blood samples. And then the blood wasn't packaged correctly, so they didn't know which blood went to who.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was thinking. He did that. He was going to mess that up somehow.
It's just weird. I don't know why he wouldn't do it.
Sounds to me like he was involved in something else that he was hoping people wouldn't find out about.
That's exactly. Trust me, read the book, The Murder of Little Miss. Trust me, there's so much happened that I can't even go into all of it because it'll take too long. Anyway, early investigators initially thought that there was more than one person involved in Lisa's murder. So his odd behavior had people wondering if Sheriff Ketchum could have been an accomplice. But we will never know because in May 2000, Ketchum drove to a remote area outside of Casper, Wyoming, and shot himself in the chest.
What?
His friends and co-workers believe that Ketchum was a good person who would never hurt anybody, but he also suffered from serious depression. They're adamant that his suicide has nothing to do with Lisa Marie Kimmell's death.
Still a little weird. The whole blood thing is weird.
He had tried it, very strange, but he had tried multiple times to kill himself, and he finally succeeded. It's very sad. Some are right to point out that if Ketchum had taken the help from federal law enforcement when offered and had agreed to the blood sample right away, the rumor mill would have never gotten started. It was unfortunately Ketchum's odd behavior over the whole thing that allowed the rumors to build. Emotions run high during a murder investigation, and because people are desperate for answers, people will just begin to speculate. And
they will, and that's the whole point of eliminating people, so you don't waste time on that.
I mean, everybody gave them
him giving blood.
No questions asked. I mean, people said we need blood samples, and they're like, "Yep, take it, do it."
Yeah.
And then you have the one person who's law kind of slimy or has that
kind of weird.
Yeah, I don't know.
Not okay.
On March 28th, 1998, the year anniversary of Lisa's death, one of Lisa's friends, the one she was going to go visit at the hospital, went to leave flowers on her grave in Sunset Memorial Gardens. When she got there, she noticed that someone had taped a note on the gravestone. The note read, "Lisa, there aren't ARE''NT. Words to say how much you're missed. The pain never leaves. It's hard without you. You'll always be alive in me. Your death is my painful loss, but heaven's sweet gain. Love always, Stringfellow Hawk.
Stringfellow Hawk?
Yep, Stringfellow Hawk is the name of a character in a short-lived television series called Airwolf, starring Jan Michael Vincent. Yes.
Yep.
Was televised between 1984 and 1986. And IMDb gives the premise of the show as, quote, a shadowy government organization, a loner, Stringfellow Hawk, steals a supersonic military helicopter from its twisted creator and uses it to fight the bad guys around the world in this 1980s action series. I never watched it. My husband loved it. And actually, I made him watch it, the first 2 episodes, so he could give me a synopsis of it. Because, anyway, in the first 2 episodes, this is interesting. We find that Stringfellow lost his parents at the age of 12. His brother was a POW in Vietnam. And his girlfriend, a high school girlfriend, I guess, is killed in a car crash. So nothing but tragedies, right? Follows Stringfellow here.
So he's got nothing to live for but vengeance.
Exactly. Yeah. So, not thinking he can ever fall in love again, Stringfellow happens to meet and fall for a woman by the name of Gabrielle. The couple, the 2 of them, spend 6 glorious days together in his isolated cabin before she gets kidnapped and killed.
Of course.
And just to add here that even though Lisa was missing for 8 days before her body was found, she was held captive for 6. So I'm thinking our murderer thought himself as a Stringfellow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have some words. I got some thoughts about him too, but I won't share those.
So anyway, this note was filed away with the rest of the evidence, and many believed that it was left by her killer. But why had he chosen the moniker of a mostly forgotten action killer? Well, now we kind of knew, right? I think he kind of thought of himself as the Stringfellow guy.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, they knew that if it was left by the killer, he was local, or he drove to Natrona County, Wyoming, to Billings, just to leave a note on the anniversary of her death.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I'm kind of surprised that police didn't stake her graveside out at that, because they do that a lot, you know?
Yeah, but
this was a different time.
Well, he had, I think, on the note, it was dated on November. But I think her dad had been out after November. I don't know. So it was, the times didn't mash up. Mm-hmm. Like the date was completely wrong on the note. Mm-hmm. The dated that the killer had put, it was completely wrong. I don't know. So despite the family's intense campaign to keep Lisa's case in the media, they had her disappearance on Unsolved Mysteries. That's where I saw it, which brought in 579 calls to the show. That was worldwide, I guess. 50 more were made to the local investigators. The community set up a memorial fund at First Bank of Billings to help fund the search, and Arby's even offered a reward. The case didn't have any solid leads. With all of that, no solid leads were gone, and what? The trail went cold. And it sat unsolved for 14 years.
Wow.
God love some DNA. I'm telling you, that DNA science is the best thing ever. In 2002, there was a match in CODIS to that DNA collected off Lisa Marie's body. The DNA belonged to a 57-year-old man already in custody. Guy's name was Dale Wayne Eaton. When investigators found out who the DNA belonged to, they searched his property in Moneta, Wyoming, which, from what I looked it up, Moneta at one point had a population of 10. And I don't think it has grown any since then.
Moneta needs some Moneta people there.
Moneta people. Investigators knew that the DNA would only prove that he had raped her. It wouldn't prove that he had killed her. They needed more evidence. So Eaton's neighbor told them that, you know what? We saw him digging a very large hole for a septic tank on his property back in 1988. So after some digging of their own, authorities found Lisa Marie's black Honda sports car completely buried in a hole on his property. Her broken Little Miss license plate was found nearby. And that hole, I mean, he'd stripped the car pretty much, but in the hole was also her Arby's visors. Just, I can only imagine.
It was,
No,
right?
it was hers. The VIN, they read off the VIN number while it was still in the hole, and it was hers. They knew immediately. So who was Dale Wayne Eaton? I'm glad you asked, Cam. So I'm going to tell you.
Mm-hmm.
Dale Eaton was born on the 10th of February, 1945, the second of 8 children, and he was the oldest boy. By all accounts, his childhood was plagued by an abusive father with very bad anger issues, which Dale actually kind of took that up for himself, too.
Apple didn't fall far from the tree.
No, it's very poor, and they had very poor care. He never had access to regular health care. His mother was reported as being very loving, but unfortunately, around 1961, she began showing signs of mental illness and was hospitalized on a few occasions. It's thought that she may have had schizophrenia, but for some reason, Dale Eaton blamed himself for his mother's illness. Family moved around constantly, and Dale had very little to no education. Eaton was also hospitalized twice for mental evaluation. At the age of 16, Dale started to get in trouble with the law. At one point, his sister needed gym shoes, and they didn't have any money. So Dale stole either a pumpkins or watermelon. It's not clear on which one it was. And he was going to sell them for money to get shoes for his sister. Well, a woman caught him stealing. So what did he do? He stabbed her. A very short fuse, I tell you. Very bad temper. The woman survived, but Dale was charged with burglary and assaults with a deadly weapon and was sent to a reformatory school until he was 19. After he left the school, he became involved with a 16-year-old girl. The family really liked her, and he would be gone since he was a welder, right? He worked. He would be gone during the weekdays and only home on weekends. Well, she's 16, she kind of loses interest, and she ends up finding another boyfriend closer to her age, and this devastated Dale. He gets arrested for grand larceny. He's sent to the Colorado Buena Vista Correctional Facility. In fact, during the 1960s, Dale spends a lot of time at that facility. He's in and out of grand larceny charges and parole violations. He became a welder by trade, but would rarely hold down a job for more than 90 days at a time. In 1971, he gets married, but the marriage was very rocky and very abusive. They had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. By the time the relationship was at its end, he had mostly stopped working completely, and the family was living in a trailer with no amenities. Dale's son claimed his father molested him when he was 10. The authorities were called, and they removed him from the home. And by that time, his wife had had enough and filed for divorce. And this led to a severe depressive episode in 86 when he threatened to kill himself. And the depression at this time was so bad, he actually went to a police station to ask for help. And he was taken to a psychiatric hospital, treated, and released. Throughout his life, he was diagnosed with depression, anxiety, the inability to relate, and explosive disorder. His IQ was at the very low end of normal. About the time of the divorce, his uncle gave him a piece of property in Moneta, Wyoming, and somehow Eaton came into possession of a 1951 school bus that he had parked on the property, and he turned it into his living quarters. The few people who visited him there said that he lived in absolute squalor. He ate venison with his bare hands, and again, having no amenities. Nothing. No electricity, nothing. He would go to the rest stop in Waltman off US 2026 to get water. And he even stated that sometimes he'd go to the car wash and take a shower while cleaning the vehicle. So, this is at the point of his life where he abducted, raped, and murdered Lisa Marie Kimmell. And don't forget, he held her for 6 days, bound up in that school bus. That's where he held her, kept her in that school bus. But if it hadn't been for another crime that he'd committed in September of 1997, probably would never have been caught. Newlyweds Scott and Shannon Breeden were traveling home from Santa Cruz, California with their 4.5-month-old baby boy after visiting Scott's family. They were traveling in their van, which they kind of turned it into an RV. It had a stove, a sink, and bed, you know. They were showing off the new baby to their family. While driving along Highway I-80, or Interstate 80, I guess it would be, in Wyoming on their way home, their van experienced engine trouble. What followed was a series of events that every broken down traveler on the deserted stretch of highway fears. I'm not joking. This is a movie. Mm-hmm. They sat there and they waited for 18 hours and nobody came. It's deserted highway, right? 18 hours.
Deserted, though. My gosh.
There was not a police officer, no highway patrol, EMT, no one to help. Oh. A few truckers pulled over and promised that they'd get them help when they got to the city, but they either forgot or...
How could you forget
it fell on... I don't know. Finally, the couple was beginning to get really desperate because they were running out of food and they had a 4.5-month-old baby, along with a 6-toed kitty and a 3-legged dog. Trust me, it's like a fun buddy road trip movie up until this point. They were desperate, and all of a sudden, a beat-up 1985 Dodge van pulled off the side of the road behind them. The driver was Dale Wayne Eaton. He got out to check his engine. Then, turning around, he asked them if he needed a ride. And, of course, desperation overriding better judgment, the couple say yes.
But you would, I would think, you know, there's 2 of us and 1 of him, but we'll be fine.
And a baby and a cat and a dog.
Well, the cat and the dog can stay there. We'll come back to that.
Well, it was like they'll either starve or they get help. They'd been out there forever, right?
Right.
They needed to do something. So they drove for a while, and Shannon kind of grew a little uneasy as they progressed because Dale kept mumbling to himself. Oh. And she kind of thought he looked like a serial killer. Then Dale started to complain that he was tired and asked if one of them wouldn't mind driving while he took a nap. So Shannon took over driving because Scott had a suspended license, and Scott held the baby in the passenger seat. Well, mumbling kept going, and next thing you knew, Dale was holding a rifle at them.
Oh.
He told them to turn down a dirt road, but Shannon decided there was no way in hell she was going to do that. If she was going to die, she was going to fight right there on the highway. So she was smart, and she gunned the gas, and she turned the steering wheel violently, and it knocked Eaton over. When the van was stopped, Scott jumped out of the van with the baby, and Shannon fought with Eaton over to control the vehicle. Scott hid the baby under a bush on the side of the road and went running to help his wife, who had managed to get out of the van at this point. Eaton tackled her, and in the process, dropped his gun. Now he pulled out a butcher knife, and he held it to Shannon's ribs, and he threatened to kill her. But Scott didn't let that stop him from hitting Eaton over the head with his own rifle. Mm-hmm. He hit him hard, so hard, in fact, the stock of the rifle broke. But still, Eaton kept fighting. While Shannon was fighting for her life, the knife came out of Eaton's hands and into Scott's, which at the time, Scott took the knife and stabbed Eaton. And still, Eaton kept fighting.
Unbelievable.
Dale, Eaton, ran to his van and got a metal pipe and came after the Breedens once again. And once again, the Breedens managed to get the upper hand. They wrestled the pipe from Eaton and started to beat him with it. They beat him on the head and on the back, and the man just kept fighting. He would not stop. Just kept coming at him.
Mm-hmm. He was fighting for more than we know right then. You know what I mean?
So Scott decided to start hitting him in the knees, and that's what finally brought Eaton down. And when he was on the ground, he just looked at them and said, "Okay, I'm done."
You think?
Then he had the nerve to ask Scott for a cigarette.
Would like to say I'm surprised, but no, I'm not.
They grabbed their baby and they drove off in Eaton's van towards civilization while Dan lay in the road in the bloody heap.
Good.
When Eaton was rescued, he basically confessed to the attempt of abduction, and he claimed that he had a terminal disease that he wanted to commit suicide.
Mm-hmm. But he was going to take out people with him.
Well, he wanted to commit suicide, but he was hoping that the couple would kill them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, he probably wouldn't have fought so much if that was the truth. Another thing, while they were there, they found handcuffs. And he's like, "Oh, yeah, that was an ex-girlfriend's. She kind of left them. She left it. I don't even have keys to them." He did. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Most likely, he probably just said he was going to commit suicide and he wanted them to kill him just to garner sympathy is probably the bet. I don't know.
No, he didn't even want to do that. He didn't want to do that. He was going to kill them, too. He just said that.
It is unreal. Eaton was convicted of aggravated assault on the Breedens, and after serving 99 days in jail, Eaton took a plea agreement. He had to promise several things like finding full-time employment upon his release and abiding by the law. He also was ordered to undergo a mental health evaluation. In exchange, he was given 2 to 5 years in a halfway house where he could leave and go to work as long as he returned by curfew. When his vandals were returned to him, it was not surprising that he simply got into his vehicle and drove away, never to return. A warrant was issued for his arrest, and he was found in the Shoshone National Forest in possession of a brand new rifle. He was then sent to federal prison, and in September of 2001, Dale killed his cellmate.
Oh.
Now, what happened with this is his cellmate, much smaller guy than good old Dale here. It seems that when in this prison, if you needed to use privacy, to use the toilet, I guess, you would put a sheet of paper or something up over the door window for privacy. And everybody, it was code. It was like hanging the sock on your door handle that not to come in. So he had done that one morning. And at the same time, all the prisoners were ordered to go back into their cells for a head count. Well, when the cellmate opened the door in a fit of anger, because, you know, the whole privacy thing, Dale punched the man. Punched him,
and that killed him?
And the man died of a ruptured vertebral artery. Dale was charged with manslaughter of his cellmate. When Dale entered federal prison, his DNA was taken, and that's how they got his DNA that matched the DNA left on the body of Lisa Kimmell. So the trial for Lisa's murder started in March of 2003. At the trial, prisoner Joseph Dax testified that Dale had told him that Lisa Marie had been helping him out and giving him a ride. Now, Joseph Dax was actually met Dale in prison. So this is kind of a prison story, right?
So he's a trustworthy guy, both of them?
Probably, yeah. So Dale told Joseph that Lisa Marie had been helping him out by giving him a ride. Once on the road, Dale made a sexual advance, which caused Lisa to slam on her brakes. That's when he said things spiraled out of control from there because she was, quote, acting all high and mighty.
Oh.
Dax said that Eaton never confessed on as to how he killed her.
Or kept her for several days?
Yeah, exactly. When Dax entered the courtroom, Eaton yelled, quote, "You effer, don't point at me. You don't even know me." Like, he bursts out all the time during outbursts during the trial. A handwriting expert said that Dale Eaton's handwriting matched the handwriting left on the note of Lisa Marie's grave. This means that Eaton intentionally drove all the way to Billings, Montana to leave the note on the anniversary of her death. And then a psychiatrist that spoke with Eaton gave a different testimony altogether. He said that Eaton had told him that he had seen Lisa on his property on the Moneta right after he had a very distressing call with his ex-wife. He had asked his ex-wife for the kids for Easter weekend, and she said no. She then added that the kids weren't really his and that she was with another man. And of course, short fuse, bad temper. Then he comes across the car on his property and he thought he was going to be robbed. He's got this thing that he always thinks he's going to be robbed. But then he saw Lisa. He thought, well, maybe now I won't be alone for Easter. He kept Lisa restrained in the bus, and the only conversation Eaton told the doctor was that Lisa had told him that she just wanted to be home by Easter. After Eaton, quote, decided to kill her, he walked up behind her with a pipe and hit her over the head. When she fell, he then discovered that she was still alive, so he stabbed her until her heart stopped. He then wrapped her body in plastic, one of the plastics that like a mattress comes in when you first get it. And he took her to the old government bridge just west of Casper and dumped her body into the North Platte River. There he knew that somebody would come along and she would be found by Easter. So, like I said, not many people believe that Lisa was on her property. They think she was at a rest area. And the reason being is that Lisa's father had always taught her that after filling up your gas tank, you reset the trip odometer. I always used to do this too. That way you can keep track of how many miles per gallon you get in your car. And when Lisa's car was dug up from Eaton's yard, like I said, the car had been stripped, but the trip odometer was still there, and it showed 215.8 miles. And when Lisa would make the journey home, one of her stops was always at Cheyenne, Wyoming, and that's where she would fill up her car with gas and then set her trip odometer. And that mileage would have put her at the Waltman rest stop at US 2026.
Mm-hmm. So she probably just pulled over to go to the restroom, and then he was waiting there.
Get gas, stretch her legs, maybe get a soda, and then he came up to her. We don't know that part, but that's how he found her, was at the rest stop. Mm-hmm. The jury convicted Eaton for the murder of Lisa Marie Kimmell, and in 2004 sentenced him to death. For years, he was the only inmate in Wyoming on death row. However, an appeal was soon made. It seemed that even though the trial judge had expressed concerns that Eaton appeared to have had memory problems and might not be able to assist in his own defense, Eaton's defense lawyers expressed no interest in presenting a mental health defense and failed to present evidence relating to his significant mental health problems. In 2014, a Wyoming federal district court overturned Eaton's death sentence as a result of those failures, but denied his challenge to his conviction. After prosecutors said they intended to seek the death penalty again, the trial court ordered a mental evaluation. By then, the 76-year-old Eaton's brain function had been further damaged by strokes, and he was also diagnosed with dementia and depression. In September of 2021, Natrona County prosecutors agreed to withdraw the death penalty, and Eaton's sentence was commuted to life in March of 2022. Lisa's family is understandably upset by the verdict. Sheila, of course, Lisa's mom, spoke to Eaton in the courtroom, and from the Oil City Times, quote, "We believe Lisa wasn't your first or your last."
I agree.
Sheila said that Eaton was given at least 5 separate opportunities to apologize and to admit what the family alleges. Quote, "Over the course of time, you only rejected it." At the end of her statement, Sheila once again told him to apologize. After sentencing, Eaton told his lawyer to apologize for him.
No.
I'm sorry. But Sheila didn't accept it. Because why? It didn't come directly from him. One of the ADAs that prosecuted Eaton told the Star Tribune that he overheard Eaton tell his lawyers that he had nightmares about the murder, and that, quote, "She's the only person I ever killed."
I don't believe that.
As do many others.
Because if he admitted to another one, he'd get a one-way ticket back to the death row, and he does not want that.
No discussion about Dale would be complete without it taking a serious look at whether Lisa was his first victim. A handful of articles mentioned that items belonging to other women, like jewelry and clothing, were found in Eaton's house, bus, home, whatever, and that there were also newspaper articles about other murdered women among his things. Several women have gone missing or whose remains have been found in the Great Basin, thus leading some to speculate that there was or is a Great Basin serial killer or two at work, and that Eaton could very well have been one of them, if not him. Here's a few unsolved murders and disappearances that warrant a closer look. We're going to go into them. In August of 1982, Belinda Mae Grantham, age 20, was found in the North Platte River near Glen Rock, the same river that Lisa Marie Kimmell was found in 1988. Belinda was last seen at the Natrona County Fair in Casper, Wyoming. She was found with a rope around her neck and that was tied to a 33-pound rock to weigh it down. She'd been strangled. Belinda left behind a 16-month-old baby girl. Janelle Lee Johnson was born in February 1960 in Montana. In 1983, she left her home in Riverton, Wyoming for an interview at the Vinoy Talent Center in Denver. She made it to the interview on February 17th and left Denver at about 5:30 to return home to Riverton. She was low in cash, so she hitchhiked to a truck stop in St. Clair, Wyoming, where she was seen by a witness, but she never returned home. Her housemate reported her missing on February 22nd, 1983, to the Riverton Police Department. On March 1st, 1983, the body of 23-year-old Janelle Johnson was found on Muskrat Creek Road, Shoshone, Wyoming. She had originally been buried, but storm runoff had revealed her legs, and that's how a county worker found her. She had been raped and strangled with a wide ligature, most likely a belt. The killer had left bite marks on her shoulders. And, interesting fact, that a newspaper clipping about Janelle's death was found in Eaton's trailer when the police searched for Lisa's car. Naomi Kidder was a petite, brown-haired girl born in December of 1963. And in June of 82, Kidder, who was 18, left from Buffalo, Wyoming, with several friends en route to Rawlins. They stayed at a Travelodge hotel for several days. Naomi wanted to stay longer than her friends, and by the time she was ready to head back home, she ran out of travel money and decided to hitchhike. She was never seen alive again, and her mother reported her missing on July 1st. Naomi's nude mummified body was found September 10th, 1982 on 33 Mile Road in Natroni County, Wyoming. Still around her neck was a twisted wire ligature that she had been strangled with. Now, police didn't realize who she was until 1994 because her dental records had gone missing, or they were never entered into the database in the first place. When Naomi's mother learned no dental records were on file, she'd sent them again and discovered that her daughter had been buried for 12 years. It's strongly felt that Naomi, Janelle, and Belinda could be victims of Dale Eaton. They aren't the only unsolved murders, Jane Does, or missing women in Wyoming, but these seem to be three that investigators and, of course, web sleuths circle back to when they discussing whether Lisa was Eaton's first and or only victim. However, there is one other woman's disappearance that is also mentioned quite a bit when listing victims for Dale, and that's Amy Roe Bechtel. Amy was born on August of 1972 in Santa Barbara, California. She was the youngest of 4 children, and she had a reputation of being outspoken, goal-oriented, and determined. She attended the University of Wyoming, where she met her husband, Steve, and began long-distance running. She hoped to try out for the 2000s Olympics, which, good for her, man. The couple moved to the town of Lander, Wyoming, and had recently purchased a home. Lander was only about an hour from Moneta, Wyoming, where Dale was living at the time. On the morning of July 24th, 1997, Bechtel told her husband Steve that she was planning on running several errands in town before going on a run. She stopped at Camera Connection, which was a photo store, at around 2:30, and after the photo store, she stopped at Gallery 331. That's where she spoke to the proprietor, and he noted that Bechtel seemed hurried and repeatedly glanced at her watch during the conversation. This man was the last confirmed sighting of Amy. After leaving the photo shop, it's believed by authorities that Amy drove to the Shoshone National Forest to do a practice run of 10K race that she was organizing. And according to an eyewitness driving through the forest that afternoon, a woman resembling Amy was seen running along the road wearing black shorts similar to those that Amy had worn earlier that day. At 4:30, Steve, her husband, returned home from having spent the day with a friend. They were rock climbing, and of course, Amy was gone. At 10:30 p.m., he called the police to report her missing. And at 1 a.m. on the morning of July 25th, Amy's car was discovered parked on Burnt Gulch Road by some friends of hers. Her keys, sunglasses, and the to-do list she had was in the car seat. Her wallet was missing, though. Initially, investigators thought she'd fallen victim to an animal attack. Bears, mountain lions, and venomous snakes are prevalent in that area. But there was no trace of her, no blood, no clothing, no signs of a struggle, nothing to corroborate that theory. Mm-hmm. Volunteers searched the path of the 10K race that she was training for. So unless she left that route just to go running in the woods, one would think that they would have seen signs of an animal attack. The investigation turned, of course, to who? The husband. When an eyewitness on the mountain road saw a truck speed by, and that truck resembled Steve's, and they saw a man and a woman in the truck. The witness specifically identified the type of truck that Steve owned. After investigators found some notebooks written by Steve where he described graphic and violent things and a need to dominate, they were pretty sure that Steve was the guy. However, Steve claimed that the writings were just song lyrics and dark fantasy stories. Of course, Steve refused a polygraph on the suggestion of his lawyer. And after the police lied to him and told him that they had proof that he'd killed his wife, he terminated the interview and quit cooperating with the investigation. In addition, when he called to report his wife missing, he was rather flippant and he was kind of joking on the phone with the operator. You know, all those things that you probably shouldn't do, but I probably would because that's my personality. All those things led to people believe that he in fact killed his wife, but there's no evidence of that at all. Besides the notebooks, there's not anything else to suggest that he had anything to do with his wife's disappearance. In fact, it's not even sure that he even had time to do anything between his alibis and everything. It's just, there's little tiny pockets, little gaps, but nothing that could do that. So just if Steve wasn't responsible and it wasn't an animal attack and she didn't succumb to a debilitating injury and she wasn't suicidal, that only leaves one other possibility, that she was abducted by a stranger, right?
Which probably is it. Yeah.
Well, interesting enough, Cam, Dale's brother heard all about this. He heard about Amy. And he actually called the Fremont County Sheriff's Office to say that he thought his brother did it.
Yeah.
His brother had been camping in the Burnt Gulch area at that time and could have had something to do with Amy's disappearance.
Wow.
And even if Eaton hadn't been camping there, he lived just a little over away.
A little over a what?
A little over an hour away, sorry.
Oh, you left out the hour.
I did. I had just a little brain.
But it's also like a camping facility. That'd be so easy to go there and pick up somebody.
Yep.
If that's what he wanted to do.
And the Shoshone National Forest is where investigators would find Eaton hiding out as a fugitive a few years later. Almost 2 months after Amy disappeared, Eaton would attempt to kidnap the Breeden family in a location that was about an hour and a half from Lander, where Amy lived, and about 2 hours from Eaton's home in Moneta. Eaton was quite familiar with the highways of the Great Basin area. I mean, he traveled a lot. Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, Nevada, and Kansas. He traveled them all until 1998, when he was convicted for assault. The Fremont County Sheriff's Office tried to interview Dale about the disappearance of Amy, but he refused to talk about it. And at this point in time, it's not even certain that he could contribute much information considering his head injuries, strokes, and his memory issues. As it stands, there's no evidence linking Dale to the disappearance or murders of Janelle, Naomi, and Belinda, or even Amy, or quite frankly, any other unsolved murders or disappearances in the Great Basin. But most people tend to believe that Lisa Marie Kimmell was not his first or only victim. In fact, Sheila Kimmell, in the book that I mentioned earlier, The Murder of Little Miss, she writes, quote, "The Utah Criminal Tracking Analysis Project suggests that the Great Basin murders stopped around 1997. Wow. And then she notes that Dale went to prison around that time.
Yep. It's funny how that works, huh?
Yep.
These are just the ones that they suspect he could have been involved in. What about the ones that they don't even know
That area is
about?
so deserted that bodies could be anywhere and they'd never find them. On an end note, Sheila and Ron Kimmell filed a wrongful death lawsuit, and they won Eaton's property. So what would have been Lisa's 36th birthday, they went out to the property and burned all the buildings down to the ground.
That's what I was just going to say. That's it. Because I was like, what are you going to have a party
they
there?
Leveled it.
I didn't.
They
that's exactly
leveled
what I was like. They catch it on fire? Set it on fire, rather?
Yep. And then, sadly, Ron Kimmell passed away on January 20th, 2020 at the age of 72. So Semper Fi. That is the story of Little Miss Lisa Marie Kimmell.
I can guarantee he has others. I mean, how many times?
He does.
You know?
He does. Don't you think he was a little schizophrenic? He thought people was robbing him all the time.
All the time.
Something wasn't right. It doesn't give him any... No. What he did is unforgivable. He obviously had enough sense to...
commit these murders.
Right. And get away with it all. I mean, it couldn't have been dumb luck. Like, it took 14 years for them
I wonder if the other
to find him.
Women, if there was any DNA left behind on them.
No. The one was mummified. That even if there was, it couldn't... Nothing could have come forth. And it was back in the early 80s, and I'm not even sure if they collected DNA back then, really, or thought about it. From what I read, I couldn't find anything about DNA.
Yeah, I was just wondering.
From them.
You'd have to dig them up and, yeah.
Right. But it just, Dale's got more of a past than he's going to ever tell, if he could even tell.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if his ramblings, though, if, sometimes the consciousness kind of comes and goes, and I wonder if, I don't know.
But can you take those seriously?
No, but it would be interesting to see what he says, because of,
I don't know. It's heartbreaking. I really do think if you're interested in this case, pick up The Murder of Little Miss by Sheila Kimmell.
I can't believe she wrote a book.
Who's going to know? Oof. Well, yeah. I mean, who's going to know more than the mother of the victim, right? And it's, like I said, I cried 4 or 5 times before page 40. Just completely tragic. There is another book called River of Blood. Page through that. You can get that on Amazon too, but once I found Sheila's book, there was really no need to pick up anything else. And if you want to know more about Amy Woe-Bechtel, our friend Steve from Trace Evidence, he always does a great job with missing and disappearance and stuff like that. He covered that episode. He covered it in one of his episodes. He even looks up the temperature of the day that the person goes missing. Like, he gives you the weather forecast for that day. That's how in-depth Steven gets in his podcast. Wow. He's a good one. If you're not following Steve, I'd suggest you do.
And what's the name of his podcast
I keep saying
again?
Steven. Trace Evidence.
There you go. You're welcome, Steven.
Yes.
But yeah. Plug. Well, that was a good job. I have not heard of that. I don't even remember that on
Oh, God, I remember seeing it on Unsolved Mysteries. I remember that car. They actually, for Unsolved Mysteries, they got a car exactly like Lisa's, and they had the mud flaps like hers. They had put the license plate on like hers. And a lot of the people that called in said, I saw it. And it was actually from Unsolved Mysteries.
Oh.
The car that they used in Unsolved Mysteries.
Oh.
Or a few of the calls were that, I should say.
Yeah. Well, good. Jen, that was a really good job. Make sure to pick up that book if you're interested in this case. Until then, remember, lock your doors.
And keep passing by those open windows.
Bye-bye.
Love ya. Today's episode was researched and written by me, Jen. For more information about this episode, as well as all other sources, please check out our show notes or the podcast website at ourtruecrimepodcast.com. Our True Crime Podcast is developed and created by the hosts, Jen and Cam. Original music and audio mix of all our True Crime Podcast episodes is courtesy of Nico Vertesi from We Talk of Dreams. You can reach Nico at wetalkofdreams.com. Listener discretion is provided by Edward October from OctoberPod VHS. You can find all of his great works on YouTube. Please make sure to like and subscribe to our True Crime Podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. We can be reached on Instagram and Facebook at Our True Crime Podcast or on Twitter with the handle at Our True Crime Pod. You can also email us at ourtruecrimepodcast@gmail.com. We would also at this time like to thank our patrons. We would be so lost without you. Thank you so much. And if you would like to help support the show, you can check us out on patreon.com/Our True Crime Podcast. You can also show your support by leaving a 5-star review on Apple or simply just tell your friends about us. It's that easy. Love ya.